Welcome, everybody. And we have a fantastic guest here today. This is Claire Wade-Hak, and I'm going to talk about her experience in the dietitian and nutrition side, which in the section of our wheel is your physical health. And of course, your diet, nutrition, your exercise is all extremely important. So Claire graduated summa cum laude from California State University with a bachelor's of science in nutritional science. She's a registered dietitian, and she has counseled patients in various subspecialties, including critical care, substance abuse, psychiatric, spinal cord injury, bariatric surgery, renal dialysis, and home-based primary care. She taught patient education classes on nutrition for prediabetes, diabetes, obesity, bariatric surgery, and mental health. Claire is also a clinical dietitian and oversaw the clinical nutrition care for a 116-bed behavioral-based medical center. Today, she is the director of membership for the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And thank you for being here, Claire.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So we do something called the Wheel of Purpose. And the Wheel of Purpose is 6 different areas of people's lives that they put work and energy into, and they create a new purpose, and they take the tiniest little steps or the biggest steps, whatever they want to go in that direction. And what we're finding is people have life-changing experiences. So this part is physical health, and this is obviously a crucial part of our wheel, because without health, it affects every other section of the wheel, your spirituality, your work, your play, your relationships. It affects everything. So I want you to assume that you are talking to, we like to call him Joe from Ohio. And Joe from Ohio is middle America, the average guy, watches football on TV, probably leans a little bit righter than we like him to lean, or, but he's maybe an independent. But he has never really understood nutrition or how that affects each of us. So can you give me, from a dietitian's perspective, what makes a healthy life?
That's such a great question. And I don't think there's one answer to that. It's funny because I've recently been reflecting a lot on what health means to me. I think it's a really individual question, because health, like for instance, for me, health means I want to feel strong and energized in the body that I live in. I want to feel capable of doing what I want to do, and I don't want to feel burdened with disease and pain and the other things that can come with ill health. So for me, health is really a vessel to living the life that you want to live, and to just experiencing being in a body that feels joyous instead of heavy. And there's going to be ups and downs, but that's what health means to me, I'd say.
Our guy, Joe from Ohio, he's not going to understand any of that for him. We've been, including in my own family, I grew up in a family of 8 kids, Catholic, meat and potatoes. Most of us didn't like vegetables. I never saw a salad or an avocado until I came to California when I was 21 years old. I might have seen a couple salads, but not in our house. It wasn't, salad was never a big thing. And certainly as I've been growing, I've learned so much more. I'm still not even close to being there. And so I'm as excited to listen to you as anybody else is. Educating people is really, really important. So let's talk to everybody. How can they start educating themselves in a way that frees them up to start making good decisions for themselves? Because there's a lot of past history thrown in there. There's guys that hang around with other guys that they're not going to have a vegan meal while everybody else is eating steak, because there's like peer pressure. Mm-hmm. So where do people start to understand that? What's the first couple of steps that people can take to start on that path towards a cleaner, better diet?
Yeah. So I think, again, this can be individual, but I do think there's a lot that people sometimes think that it's all or nothing, especially when it comes to things like plant-based nutrition or eating healthy. And the reality is that for most people, for the real changes that you want to see in terms of your impact on your health, it needs to be long-term, right? That's what really makes a difference. It's not a salad here or there, but long-term. And so for most people, long-term change means gradual change. Some people are 100% in for a dramatic change overnight, but for most of us, we need gradual change over our lives that becomes sustainable. So what that translates to in nutrition, I think, is doing something as simple as, so one of the most underconsumed nutrients in America that people eat very little of and need much more of is fiber. And so that's like a very unglamorous thing. People like to talk about protein and other things. And fiber is found in any whole plant-based food, right? Any whole plant food basically has fiber. So as something as simple as adding a vegetable to every meal that you're eating, at least for lunch and dinner, and a fruit to breakfast, makes actually a really big difference. And the reason for that is if you add like a cup of vegetables, you pick some greens or you pick some carrots or whatever you like, just the act of adding that not only adds in the nutrition that you're getting from that, the vitamins and minerals and everything else, it also means that you fill up more on that. And so you eat a little bit less of things that may not be as nutritionally beneficial. So I think starting small, which is making changes that feel impactful. If you're drinking, for instance, a lot of soda, if you switch out 1 or 2 of those sodas a day with a glass of water instead, maybe with some lemon or lime or something to make it more flavorful, that makes a big difference, right? So I'd say just start small and see how you feel.
There's probably a lot of truth to that. Look, we're the land of diets in America, and we're the land of diet fads in America. And diets tell you a million different things. You know what I mean? It's like there are diets that tell you don't eat any fruit, because there's too much sugar in it. Mm-hmm. And there are diets that tell you to just eat protein, right? Eggs, meat, and things like that. I think people get caught up in the fact that dieting means health. That just because they lose weight means that they're going to be healthier. That's not necessarily the case, is it?
No, absolutely not. Like a good example would be something like a ketogenic diet can lead towards significant weight loss in the beginning, but your cardiovascular health often will suffer from that, right? So your risk of things like heart disease can go up. And there's times where a ketogenic diet is appropriate in medical settings, but for most people, it's not going to be that great. So in terms of people that are thinking of health or nutrition in terms of diet, one of the things to understand is that there's actually much more in common when you look at research and you look at evidence-based diets like Mediterranean or the DASH diet, if you've heard of that, it's for high blood pressure and a number of other diets, right? Even a paleo diet, actually, if you look at like a good paleo diet is mostly going to be about vegetables. It's mostly going to be about plant foods and then some of these other elements, right? Some of the animal proteins. And the majority of them have more in common than they don't, which is that the majority of them say you need to be eating mostly whole plant foods. You can also have some amounts of these other things. And now the research that I follow points to a whole food plant-based diet being the absolute healthiest. But if you're looking at it as a spectrum, if you are here and you're at the whole food plant-based, that's great. But if you're over here, that is still a lot healthier than if you are eating what's called the standard American diet, which is sort of notorious for being really high in things that are not as healthy for us and really low in things that aren't so good. So I would say if you're thinking about diet, nutrition, or health in terms of diet, your diet does have a huge impact. But the rules that come with dieting are often really restrictive, and that can really backfire, right? Because when in your life has being restricted meant that you thrive? Rarely does restriction and a sense of deprivation translate to health and long-term changes. So one of the things that I recommend for people when you're looking to make changes to your diet, what's really important is that you focus not only on what you're taking away, what you're losing in terms of the things you enjoy or like, but what you're putting in. You have to put in things and really focus on that, right? So you have to choose foods that you like. You know, when you're going through vegetables, if you hate Brussels sprouts, don't eat Brussels sprouts. You know, there's no one thing that you have to eat. So make changes that you enjoy, and then also be focusing on it from that point of view of how you feel. And that, again, if you're feeling deprived, I think that's a really valid feeling that you have to listen to, and finding a way to balance and recalibrate means that it can stop you from being in kind of a binge cycle, right? A binge and restrict, which is even people that aren't dealing with eating disorders, a lot of American diet looks like that, you know, that kind of yo-yo dieting that's so notoriously both terrible for your health and for your mental health as well. So,
you're not supposed to share personal information about me about this yo-yo dieting and everything, okay? Unreal. Did Journey tell you that? That's ridiculous.
Yeah, but it's true. Most
really,
of us have had that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. I've done it all. I've fasted on water for 10 days.
Mm-hmm.
I've done the lemonade diet numerous times. You know, I've done Fit for Life, and which is actually was one of the better ones, Fit for Life, because they do. It's food combining. So you don't like combine carbohydrates with protein. You eat them separate at separate meals. But no, I'm that guy. I mean, truthfully, I'm that guy, and feeling deprived. My discipline is excellent, but I know that it creeps up, and I know that bothers me, and that's when people crash.
Yeah.
It's like I just can't do it anymore. I'm going for the Oreos, and I'm going in, you know.
Yeah.
And then it's binging after that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that what people sometimes don't understand is that I fell into studying nutrition because it's one of the most foundational pieces of your health, right? It's one of the most, arguably the most important thing you can do for your health is all of what you actually eat, right? Similarly, it can be really empowering because you have so much control over that. In a lot of circumstances, there are things where you don't have control, but many people have a lot of control over their diet. But food is not only nutrition, you know, food is not only nutrition for us. And so that's really important to understand, is that it's a lot of other things. It's community. It's all these things that get programmed into us from a young age around like the idea of reward. If you're good, you get these foods. So we have so many things that are tied into that. And for me, like, I love cooking and I love eating different flavors. And so it's also just about enjoyment, right? It's about all these different things. And so when you think about nutrition, you have to build a life around food, around nutrition that meets that. And that means that you have to actually enjoy the food that you're eating. And I think that's super important, both sustainable long-term health and also to long-term like mental health, so you don't feel so terrible. And I think, again, that comes back to finding foods and recipes that you like. So, you know, you might think, I've never had a plant-based meal that I enjoyed, but there's an incredible world of flavor out there. And so kind of exploring that and having it be something that can be fun and that you can explore and like find new things you enjoy, that really changes the mindset from it being about, you know, now I'm like, for my health, I have to restrict and I have to cut out all the foods I love. Like, no one wants to do that.
As you're talking here, and I'm thinking, we raised our son basically vegetarian, and it was only because I went through a period of a couple of years, and he happened to be born, that I was a vegetarian at the time. When I look at his life now at 25 years old, he's literally never been sick. I mean, he's never been even close to seriously ill, but I don't ever remember him even getting sick all through school, which is amazing because you have so many kids around. But he was just pure healthy, and he eats responsibly, and he doesn't overeat, and it's just amazing. Of course, that's a lifetime of being a vegetarian. So vegetarian things, it scares people for a bit right away. Oh. But when I was talking with the team the other day, I was telling them I had read an article about how many famous world athletes are vegetarian or vegan or work off a plant-based diet. You probably know about that, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Venus Williams was one, Carl Lewis. I mean, this is the fastest man in the world and didn't need to eat a stick of meat. So there's a programming thing like you were just talking about up there, about how people are taught and how they're raised that, oh, man eats steak, you know, man eats meat, man eats, we got to get away from that somehow.
Yeah.
Because tell me, why are so many people obese in America?
Well, that's a really complicated question, and there's a lot of answers to it. I think the short of it is, one of the things that I think makes the most sense is, again, it comes back to like what is being increased in terms of what we're eating. And I think it's a lot of things, but I don't know if you're familiar with the term, but an obesogenic environment. And what that really means, if you break it down, is an environment that is really conducive to people becoming obese, right? To people eating a lot more of foods that aren't going to be as good for them, right? So I think it's everything from like, we're a lot busier and we have less time to prepare food. There may be less knowledge or skill. And there's a lot of processed foods on the market, right? So there's just so many easy things people can eat that are highly processed and filled with things like unhealthy fats and sugars and refined grains. And all of these things are linked usually to weight gain, right? And so I think our environment is set up in such a way that it's a little harder to maintain a weight that's a little healthier, I think. And I don't think you even have to focus on, like, I don't actually believe that you have to focus on your weight in order to maintain a healthier weight, if that makes sense. And I don't think you have to focus on your weight in order to focus on your health. And so I would say, like, to loop back around to what you mentioned on athletes go, the reasons for that are a couple of reasons that there are so many plant-based athletes or vegan athletes, which is that, first of all, the recovery time for people that are really intense in training for athletics is much lower on a plant-based diet. And that has to do with things like the antioxidants and like the micronutrient, like essentially panel of that's in the plant-based foods, can mean that recovery, like that soreness and everything that you have, can be shortened significantly. The other thing is, in our world, we've pretended that protein equals animal, right? That all protein is meat or sometimes like an egg. And proteins are in literally everything that you eat. And the amount of protein that you need is actually so much lower than people realize. There's sort of this craze where it's like even your potato chips are supposed to have protein, but actually that's not very good for you. It's actually really hard, for instance, on your kidneys. It contributes to chronic kidney disease to have high levels of animal protein. So I think there's a couple things. Understanding that protein is a really important macronutrient, right? It's really important for you, but you get enough if you're eating a varied, healthy diet. You're going to get plenty from plant-based sources as well. Things like beans, whole grains, even vegetables have protein. They're lower amounts. So I think that I don't think that it's something that I just think people don't realize that it's available to them the way it is.
I mean, it seems that as a country, we make so much money off of people and their lifestyle. I mean, for the last 40 years, for me, 50 years, there's a gazillion commercials that tell you Coca-Cola, drink Coca-Cola, your life is going to get better. Go to McDonald's, Burger King, Denny's, it's a constant barrage. And I want to say it's difficult for people to change their mind about this stuff. I mean, if you do, 50 years of eating the wrong way, what's the trigger for them? Is it that they're going to feel healthier? Because another thing here that I saw that in your history, and I want to talk about, is type 2 diabetes. We're basically in an epidemic of type 2 diabetes, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's type 2 diabetes is it's lifestyle related disease, right? And specifically diet in particular. And so what we've shown is that type 2 diabetes, as you just mentioned, is an incredibly prevalent disease that also, unfortunately, type 2 diabetes also puts you at higher risk of things like heart disease, chronic kidney disease, even things like amputations. Like, I don't want to scare anyone. This isn't a thing but it is something that is really damaging, right? And what people sometimes think type 2 diabetes equals lots of sugar. And that is a big problem. But actually, the thing that really underlies it the most is some of the really unhealthy fats that we eat. So it makes this whole diet in general that we eat essentially is like the perfect diet to develop type 2 diabetes, or the standard American diet, or the SAD diet is what it's called. But what's really exciting actually is that because it is lifestyle based, it's actually a disease that they've shown that you can put type 2 diabetes into remission just with lifestyle. So depending on where you are, you may need some medications or other things as well, other treatments. But a lot of people who have type 2 diabetes can have massive improvements just from changing their lifestyle. That's not a surgery, that's not a pill. You just change the way you eat and you have that much control over this disease in your body. And that, I think, can be really exciting because it means that you can do something about it.
So obviously you have seen a shift in people's health with type 2 diabetes that possibly were no longer type 2 diabetes because of their choices in their nutrition.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you pair it with other choices in lifestyle too, where you're doing things like you're exercising, you're trying to manage your stress management, these sort of lifestyle pillars that do also have a real impact. But for type 2 diabetes, the biggest thing by far is your diet. And so when you look at research that actually shows reversal, it's usually not called reverse, but in remission for type 2 diabetes, that's really strongly linked to a whole foods plant-based diet. So there's a lot of terms that get thrown out that can be kind of confusing. Like there's vegan, there's plant-based, there's whole food plant-based, right? And the thing to kind of keep in mind is you can be vegan or plant-based and you can not eat animal products, but you can still eat a lot of processed foods, a lot of foods that may not be as healthy. And that's a completely acceptable choice. You just have to be aware that that's more about the ethics of being vegan than it is necessarily about the health. In general, vegans are definitely healthier when they study people than omnivores by a lot. But even still, within that realm of vegan, if you move towards whole food plant-based, which means less processed foods, more things like whole grains, vegetables, are really focused on those healthy plant foods, then if you move in that direction, that's where you see the real benefits of things like disease reversal and even treatment of these chronic diseases, right? So that's where our research really points us. So you can be healthy anywhere in that spectrum, but if you're dealing with a chronic disease, then you want to be closer to that whole food plant-based to get the real health
So explain
benefit.
to me, whole food plant-based would be, what's the idea of that? Whole food plant-based.
Yeah. So you're going to be focused on things like your beans or your legumes, right? You're going to be focused on things like whole grains, so things like brown rice or whole wheat or quinoa or anything like that. Lots of veggies and produce, right? So veggies and fresh fruit. You're going to have nuts and seeds, and then mushrooms and things like that. So those are going to be the foundational pieces of your diet. And if that is the foundational piece of your diet, then even if you have a little bit of some other things, whether it's processed or even some animal products or anything like that, from a health perspective, you're already doing a ton with that. So, and again, you want to have a little bit less of like if you're going to choose a pasta, if you can choose like a whole wheat versus a refined, even something as simple as that can actually really impact people's health.
Wow. I like that. Are you familiar with Blue Zones?
I am.
So when I had a procedure done for a couple months, I went out to Loma Linda every day. And Loma Linda is a Blue Zone, the only one in the United States.
Yeah.
It probably isn't a coincidence that there are mostly 7-day Adventists that live in Loma Linda and they don't eat meat.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that actually is interesting, you mentioned blue zones, because that's one of the things that if you look at like the dietary factors that are really everybody has in common in those blue zones, one of the big things is actually legumes. So beans are strongly linked to a longer life, and even again, like they are one of the best sources of fiber. So one of the things that fiber does is it actually it's the food essentially for your microbiome, right? Which we hear a lot about, which is basically all of the wonderful little creatures that live in your gut, right? And so that's linked to a ton of different things in your health. And if you want to really have a great microbiome, which can impact your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health, because of things like serotonin and that sort of thing that are tied to it, then one of the most important things you can do is give all of the really good bacteria and other microbiome that you want in there, you feed them what they eat, right? And so that means you have to eat good fiber. And that fiber, I can't tell you how many people, I've been really surprised, honestly, how many people are scared to eat beans because they're scared it's going to upset their stomach. They're scared they're going to have gas. And that's actually a major factor for people sometimes, is they're really afraid of changes that might feel different in their body. And I always come back to like, one, you can do these changes slowly, right? So you don't have to suddenly go, I don't actually even, unless you're an exceptional person, for a lot of people going from not eating any much fiber at all to eating a whole food plant-based diet can be really jarring, actually. And you might be like, what is happening in my body? So that's one of the other things, is that you kind of need time to reacclimate, right? Because your body is really brilliant in that it adapts to whatever the thing that you're doing is. Doesn't mean it's going to be long-term healthy, but if you slowly increase some of those foods that you're eating, you eat some more vegetables and fruit, you start to introduce beans instead of meat at some meals, then those can be things that really can make a big difference. So you want to do it a little bit slowly.
Yeah, you put a
health.
plan together, and this is like what we do in the whole wheel purpose. We ask people to go slow, take a small step, just a little something in that direction, stick with it for a week, and then add a little bit more, and then add a little bit more. If we do the same thing here, you could talk about somebody in 3 or 4 months really drilling down their diet to be really good for them.
Yeah.
And the benefits of one, because can we talk about inflammation for a second? I think inflammation, it beats the hell out of it. It beats us up. It's inflammation. It makes people be less active. They want to sit more. They don't want to do much. What is our diet? What kind of effect does our diet have on inflammation, and what dietary changes can we make to reduce our inflammation to where it's not an issue?
Yeah, so it's interesting because depending on who you ask, some researchers will link a lot of chronic diseases to inflammation. And so there's a lot of different mechanisms that are happening there biologically. But one of the things that is most impactful to lower your inflammation overall is you have to understand that there are foods that are going to increase inflammation in your body, and then there's foods that are going to decrease them. And you don't have to follow a perfect diet where you only eat anti-inflammatory foods. But if you're eating a diet where you have a lot of things like fried foods, a lot of animal products, like a lot of meat and dairy and eggs, then these are things that have been linked to increased levels of inflammation, right? And this is a cumulative effect. So the more and more and more. One of the most important things you can do is going to be, again, to focus on those whole foods, right? Those whole plant foods. They have one of the most important factors to lowering inflammation is going to be antioxidants. And that's something that you really, you're going to find in things like blueberries. You're going to find in basically produce. You'll find it in other foods as well, but the best sources of that are going to be your fruits and veggies. And especially people sometimes are afraid of fruit because they're worried that it's high in sugar. But the way that sugar interacts in your body in that whole food is completely different than if you take a tablespoon of sugar, right? And so the health benefits that you're going to find in something like a colorful piece of fruit are really going to decrease that inflammation. So it's that thing where I like the metaphor of like, if you stub your toe and you do that once, your body's going to heal and it's going to be fine, right? But if you stub your toe 3 times a day, every day, it's going to have trouble healing. And that's kind of your body with your diet, right? So if you're doing this thing over and over and over, it's going to be challenging for your body to heal and adapt in the same way. So if you can instead eat foods that are going to heal your body and to lower your inflammation, then that's going to be really impactful. And again, the best sources of that are going to be your fruits and veggies. And that's something that I think that sometimes it can be hard for people when they just hear eat more fruits and vegetables. That's a very general term, right? And it doesn't really translate to actually in their life, what does this look like for me? And so again, I think you have to pare it down, like you talked about in your program, you have to pare it down to a couple of really key choices.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
That's okay. Where you're going to have things like you're going to think about, 1 or 2 things you want to change, that you're going to make sure you have a vegetable at every meal, that you're eating, a couple of pieces of fruit every day. You're having berries with oatmeal in the morning, or whatever the things are that you're doing, that you're really focused on manageable changes.
Yeah. God, I'm fired up just hearing about this stuff. It really is cool. Because what I'm thinking when you talked about stubbing your toe, when you have people that, let's say they're 20 to 30 pounds overweight, they don't get a lot of exercise, they're not eating well, and they have a lot of inflammation, these people are going to feel really bad, aren't they?
A lot of people, I mean, it depends. Like, I don't think, again, weight alone, I don't think it's going to be the indicator of whether or not
No,
someone's
but if you
healthy.
carry
But a
a
lot of
20-pound
times,
sack around with you all day long, you're going to get tired, and that's what people are basically carrying.
well, and again, like, I think there's a lot of times that people don't realize they don't feel good until you start to feel better. And so the sort of like pie in the sky idea that I'm going to feel, quote, healthy or better can be really hard for people to actually like translate to in their lives as an actual reward. And that's where some of these changes really matter, because sometimes these smaller changes you really start to notice. And it's almost like in our world, because we're so busy and we're so focused on other things and we're just on the move all the time, that we don't even know really how we feel sometimes. So that's where tools like it can be helpful for some people to sometimes even keep a simple food journal, just to note it. I think it's important to note you don't want to become obsessed with every little thing you do, right? Like if you have 1 or 2 times where you're eating more of this or more of that, the goal is not to make you focused on that and obsessed about, controlling everything. But for some people who haven't thought a lot about their diet before, who haven't noticed it, to keep a track of kind of what am I eating and then how am I feeling after, right? So like you eat a breakfast, you make down some notes about what you ate, and then you note how you felt, right? And you do that throughout the day. And sometimes you'll start to see a pattern. And then if you make some changes, you'll start to see, how that actually is impacting you in a more visual way, which for some people can be really helpful.
Right. But I think, like you say, we think about the weight, but it's really about how we're feeling. It's like we could be 20 pounds overweight and still feel great because we're eating the right things, and maybe we're screwing up a little bit here and there, but we're allowing our body to get the right nutrition that it's supposed to get, correct?
Yeah. Well, and one of the big things is, again, I think that like sometimes people think, okay, well, I'd rather not live as long and get to eat all these foods that like make me so happy, that I enjoy so much in my life. But what you have to keep in mind is it's not just how long you live, it is the quality of your life, especially in the last 20 years or so of your life. I can say, as someone that has worked with people that are dealing with chronic disease as they age, it can be really challenging and it can be really overwhelming. And there you can change at any point. But I think of it as like this incredible gift that you give yourself as you age, which is that not just do you want to live to 70 and have the last 20 years be like really challenged filled with chronic disease and like have that sort of debilitating health problem, Or do you want to live to 70 and be riding your bike, playing with your grandkids if you have them, you want to do in life, right? And that's really what it comes down to, which is that you're not, health doesn't translate to this like thing that you should do because it's good. Health translates to your life that you get to enjoy if when you have that health, right? Yeah.
That's just absolutely right on. God, you're better than I even heard about. I mean, it's like, you're feeling good. So talk to me about, what's the word they want to say? Not indigestion, but your digestion. What impact does food have on your digestion? Because there are people that suffer from digestive issues.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I like with my own son, we realized that early on that he was allergic to dairy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's people that are allergic to dairy and still do dairy, but they don't know they're allergic to dairy, but it has an effect. So tell me, what does food do for our digestion? What's the bad food do for our digestion, and what's the good food do for our digestion?
Yeah, well, so there's a lot of different layers to that question, right? Because there's everything from like food allergy, where you have like a peanut allergy, or something more severe, like if someone has celiac disease, right, where that's going to be allergic to wheat, and that your body basically is like defending against this, what it thinks is this attacking molecule, right? And so that can be really dangerous. There's also food intolerances, which is kind of what you're describing too, which is just that you may not be allergic. It may not kill you to eat this thing, but you're going to feel real uncomfortable, right? And there's no need to eat foods that we're intolerant to, that's for sure. So I would say there's a couple different things. One, there are really common allergens. So dairy is one that's actually really common that a lot of people are allergic to or are intolerant of. And that makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because dairy is something that's it's literally made from like a baby cow or a baby goat or whatever kind of milk you're drinking. It's made from the mom for that baby, very specific, right? It's not really something that, if you think about it, we didn't really evolve to actually partake in other mammals' milk. So it's something that's makes a lot of sense that like the enzyme that breaks down milk in our bodies is something that usually we grow out of as soon as we're stopped having milk ourselves, which is like under age 5 for most people, right? That you're not going to need that anymore. And so your body is really smart, and it doesn't hold on to these enzymes and these things that it doesn't need. So that's one piece. Depending on the kinds of intolerances that people are experiencing, it depends too. So like if you're experiencing a lot of different digestive problems, I definitely think that that's where it could be really valuable to work with like a dietitian, nutritionist, or someone else who might be knowledgeable, who can kind of help walk you through how to address that. If it's something that for a lot of people, you can do things called an elimination diet, which is basically that you're noting the kinds of foods that you're eating, and you're slowly, like you're basically, you bring it down to a very small amount of different types of foods that you're having, and you slowly reintroduce them back in while doing a food journal. And that kind of tells you like, okay, how do I react when I start to eat this food? Or how do I react when I start to eat this food? And those can be valuable tools. But I will say that for some people, it can be a little complicated because, for instance, if you cut out wheat and you want to see, am I allergic to wheat or am I intolerant of wheat and do I feel better? That's a really valuable thing to do. But what you have to keep in mind for wheat in particular is you may be allergic or you may be intolerant, or it may be that most of the wheat foods that you were eating were things like white flour, were things that were refined and processed and filled with extra like fats and sugars and other things that were not very good for you. You might feel better, you might feel lighter, and it could be because you cut out the wheat, or it could be because a lot of the junk food that you're eating was actually wheat, right? So that's where it's really, it can be valuable to sometimes work with a healthcare professional too, if there's really significant digestive issues, is what I would say. And then in terms of your overall digestive health, as I mentioned earlier, for your overall health of your gut, right, of all of the different species that are in there, keeping things running for your body and breaking down all that food and translating it to all the places it has to go for you. That's one where you really want to be feeding it what it wants, right? And so if you feed your microbiome foods that translate to like products that are not good for our bodies, which can happen. And so that's where if you have like a lot of meat and dairy, for instance, that can be something that can translate to products in our gut that aren't so good for our body, right? And so then that can be a part of the reason you don't end up feeling so good. But if you are instead focused on eating things that are going to make that microbiome happy, and you're going to produce like your short chain fatty acids and these other things that make your body like that your body needs, then you're going to see helping that lower your inflammation and feeling more energized in general.
This is the most important thing for me of all the information that you've given is that taking some of these steps, you will most likely have a noticeable difference in the way you feel.
Yeah.
I mean, that
Absolutely.
should be a motivator for all of us right there, is that we're going to feel better, feel lighter, move better. And it's amazing that we make choices that don't lead to that. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions about a couple things. Salt. Our potato chip aisles and all of this stuff is filled with salty products. Mm-hmm. And it's somewhat addictive, right? Because people are used to salt, their bodies craves more salt. Wouldn't you agree? Mm-hmm. So that's not good for us, though. Potato chips and pretzels, and this is not good food for us. Is it just getting away from salt altogether, or is there a halfway point with salt? Or because let's talk about Joe from Ohio. I think Joe from Ohio eats a bag of Lay's every day. He probably has a sandwich and chips every day for lunch. It's like ingrained in the American diet is all these salty products. Mm-hmm. How do we get away from them? And they are damaging to us, aren't they?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple different pieces to that. One, I'll say, I think one of the reasons, and you pointed this out when you were asking the question, which is that salt is really addictive, right? It's actually something that is a huge flavor enhancer. And so one of the reasons that you see a lot of salt and sugar being added to a lot of the foods, as they become more processed, a lot of times you lose a lot of the flavor that was naturally in that food, right? As you refine it down and down and down, it becomes kind of this bland, flavorless thing. Like if you go out and you pick a tomato from like fresh from the garden, that is an incredibly flavorful food. I don't know if you've had that experience versus having one that's been sitting in a supermarket for who knows how long. Sometimes the difference in like how they taste even is huge. So I think part of it is that as we've moved towards more processed foods and more mass production of food, where it's taking longer and longer, then the natural flavor of food kind of, again, decreases, right? In terms of, it is absolutely detrimental to our health. I think that you can decrease it in a couple different ways. The first thing to keep in mind is that your taste buds adapt. So if you go, for instance, if you're someone, and this really depends again on kind of where you are on that scale. If you're relatively healthy and you're just wanting to really feel better, or if you're dealing with like really significant high blood pressure, then that's going to be a little bit different, right? Then you might need to do something that's a little more like strong on the therapeutic side, and you might need to really lower your salt intake. If you're just striving for health in general, one of the things to keep in mind, like I said, is that if you are preparing your foods at home, there's probably already less salt in them, right? And that salt is a thing that you might want to, it's one of those nutrients that you might want to actually measure how much you're putting in, just to have an idea, because the guidelines are usually in milligrams. And then if you do anything, it's in teaspoons, right? And you have to like translate these things. So having giving yourself a basic understanding of that can be really helpful. And you don't have to have no salt, right? Like I said, it's a flavor enhancer. Salt is amazing, but you do really want to be mindful of the fact that it can be really, like high blood pressure is one of the most, unfortunately, it's one of the most detrimental and most common chronic diseases that you see here in the US, is really strongly, linked to that, right? So if you can just start to kind of lower it slowly, I think that's one of the biggest things. Lower it slowly, and if you can eat a little less processed food and cook at home a little more, that's usually a good way to do it. Like if you eat out, it's amazing how much stuff they throw in there, right? So the more you eat out, the more processed foods you have. Usually it's just included in that and you don't even notice. Whereas if people cook at home more, it tends to be that you're going to have less in general.
You mentioned it a little bit, but another related category is sugar. So tell me what sugar does for us, because obviously, there's a gazillion chocolate products out there, a billion things with sugar out there that people are absolutely addicted to. What's sugar going to do to us? And if we are going to make better decisions for ourselves, what would be those substitutes? So what does sugar do for us?
Yeah, well, I mean, sugar, again, it kind of comes back to our basic brain wants, especially for survival purposes, things that were really energy dense were really beneficial to us as we were evolving, right? And so things like sugar, salt, these are flavor enhancers, they're addictive, and they're things that your body kind of starts to crave the more you have of it. So I will say it's an escalation thing, where usually the more you have, the more you need for it to seem sweet. So that's one part of it. The other part is there's a lot of confusion around sugar and carbohydrates in general. And there's a lumping together that can happen where all sugar, including the sugar that you find in fruit, is all one thing, right? And so it's really important to tease those things out. There's added and refined sugars, which is going to be things like your candy and your table sugar, and sugar that you might add to a lot of foods, your baked goods. Then there's the sugar that you find naturally occurring in food. That because of how your body's digestive system is incredible. So when you actually break it down, when there's that fiber in there, it is absorbed into your bloodstream totally differently. So you might have a spike in your blood sugar levels, right? If you eat a candy bar. But if you eat an apple, you probably won't, because it's going to end up being added to your body, to your blood sugar at a reasonable rate, because your body is designed to break that down and process it. So I think that people should not be afraid of sugar that's in natural foods, again, in fruit, which is tied to disease reversal. It's so good for you and people need to eat fruit. Whereas if you can cut down on those, the sugars, the baked goods, the candy, all that kind of thing, it's definitely not it's tied to things like heart disease. It does contribute to type 2 diabetes, to unhealthy weight, to all these other factors, right? So for instance, I have a huge sweet tooth after lunch every day. For whatever reason, I just really want sugar. And I have found that for me personally, if I have sugar in the house, I might eat it, right? I'm just let's be honest. If there's a cookie in the house, I'm probably going to want that after lunch. But if instead in the house, I have some really great ripe fruit, like I have some amazing nectarines or mangoes, then I'll cut that up and I'll eat it, and it's incredible. I feel satisfied, I'm happy, and I met that craving where I didn't have to deprive myself, but I also held true to what I wanted for my health. And so that's the other piece I would say, is that you don't have to cut out all things that are sweet, just replace them with the better.
And so it will fulfill your craving for sugar, basically, if you eat a piece of fruit, then 5 Oreos.
Yes. Now, again, if I have 5 Oreos in the house and I have to choose in that moment between 5 Oreos and a mango, I'm probably going to pick the 5 Oreos. So for me personally, I will say, and this is true for a lot of people, it's a lot easier sometimes to make those decisions ahead of time, whether you're meal planning or just at the grocery store and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to buy the chips, I'm not going to buy the cookies, because if they're in the house, I'm going to eat them. And so if instead you make sure that you stock up your house with some really simple, not complicated, where you have to make a whole big thing just to get some sugar, if you want that sugar craving, but like just have it be something simple that you can eat instead. And then yeah, it will definitely meet that craving for me.
It's nice to know that you're human. I'm glad that you would choose the Oreos.
Yeah.
Makes me feel almost normal right now. Okay, my next, talk to me about alcohol. Beer, wine. We're a bunch of drinkers in America. What's that do to our system, and how much is not too much? Or, I don't want to say to someone, hey, give it up. You're done. You can't do any alcohol, no more steaks, no more this. There's no way you're gonna figure that out. But what kind of effect does alcohol have on us? And what's the right amount, or is there a right amount, or just tell me your perspective on that.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it's one that, like, to be transparent, I drink alcohol, right? So I'll say that at the beginning, like, I enjoy having a glass of wine, right? I will say from a health perspective, as time has kind of gone on, there's a lot of different levels to this. It depends on what you're looking at exactly. If you're looking at things like your risk of a number of different cancers, it definitely increases significantly the more alcohol you drink. So it is a thing where it's scaled, right? So if you're drinking more alcohol, your risk of certain things are going to go up. So things like heart disease, it can raise your triglycerides, it can raise like a number of things that are going to put you at more risk for your health. That being said, generally the recommendations are 1 drink or less per day. And that's not something where people can save up and have several drinks at the end of the week if they didn't have anything. From a health point of view, that's not going to be ideal, right? This is a really individual decision that, like, in the same way that, I can't tell someone just stop eating all oil, I would not tell someone just stop drinking all alcohol unless there's an addiction involved, which is a different situation, right? But from strictly a health point of view, you do want to have less more often than not, right? And so this is one that I would say, in terms of, like, if you're talking to somebody who's used to having several drinks a day, this could even translate to, maybe you start out with, like, for me personally, sometimes I'll just want, like, it's that same reward thing where I'll want something that makes me feel rewarded, and I'll want like a tasty beverage at the end of the day. So sometimes even like having sparkling water with some juice in it is enough that I'm like, okay, I feel pretty good. Or some kombucha or something that feels like a little bit of a treat, and there's some flavor and there's something there. That can be sometimes what I actually want. And then I may not even want or need alcohol. So it's just going to depend, I think, on the person and on the situation.
Yeah, I've always found myself even sometimes, I really don't want to drink, but the other 3 guys that we just play golf with are on a cocktail or a beer, and all right, give me a glass of wine or a beer or something like that. And sometimes it's not even what I really feel like having. I want something cold,
Yeah.
and that
Yeah.
lemonade or something, would even be better. It's just about making choices.
Yeah, absolutely.
Portions. So what we're going to leave people with here in a few minutes is a mental plan for themselves that they can turn into a written plan of start walking in that direction of improving their diet over the next period of time. Portion control, and what's the easy way for people to figure out what kind of portions they should have for themselves?
So I think I'll say a couple things to start. First, I think it's really important that people don't finish meals hungry. That is so important, right? There's nothing that makes you feel deprived like being hungry. So it's really important to also listen to your hunger, and there's nothing wrong with your body telling you that it's hungry. So if you're talking about healthy portion control, one of the most important things is, again, not just like cutting down on the things that aren't as good, but making sure that you're really filling out your plate with the things that are really good. So in general, just as like a general rule of thumb, if you can make roughly half of your meal more vegetable, and that can look like anything, right? Any kind of vegetable. And be kind of thoughtful about what you're adding to those vegetables. So if you cover your broccoli in a ton of butter, then that may not be quite as good as if you maybe steamed it and added just a little olive oil, a little salt and pepper to enhance that flavor, right? So be kind of thoughtful about what you're putting on your vegetables. But if you can make it about half of your plate or so, or you can do vegetables and fruit, but that will make a big difference already. And then if you focus on things like you're looking at trying to get whole grains more often than not, that makes a big difference. Again, because that one of the things that fiber does is it fills you up more, right? And so the fiber containing foods are the whole plant foods. That's what has fiber in it, right? And fruit. And so if you can get more fiber in, then usually you're going to feel more satisfied with lower calories and higher nutrition, right? Overall. And so, and then when you're looking at like something that's going to be protein is something that can be really filling and satisfying for people. And if you can start to think of like when we're talking about transitioning to more of a whole food plant-based diet or just plant-based in general, you might do things like including more beans, right? So you might have like pinto beans. There's also, people are really afraid of tofu. And tofu is kind of this, it's bland until you add things to it. And then it can really absorb flavor and can be really amazing. And so you can buy like baked tofu at the store. You can play around with cooking it yourself. That's a really great source of protein and calcium and can be really filling, right? So whatever your protein is, and it's funny because we think of it as like a protein food, which is just, again, translating that to kind of where the meat would be, but it is much more than that, which is nice as well. So you're going to like focus on having that. You're going to have some whole grain and maybe something like a lots of fresh produce on the other side, right? And that can look a lot of different ways. That could be a soup, that could be roasted veggies, that could be any number of different things. You do a pasta, you know, you just want to focus more on having more produce to balance out the rest of it. And that's going to really help with portion size, I think.
Yeah. You know, it's re-educating ourselves on what being satisfied means too. Isn't it true that like what I eat now, my body really doesn't fill up on until like 10 minutes or 15 minutes from now, right?
It's 20 minutes. Yeah.
We were 20 minutes. There you go. We were taught as kids, you can't have another pork chop unless you finish your plate. And, you know, I used to hate carrots and cooked carrots. I still to this day have like bad dreams over cooked carrots. I could eat raw carrots all day. But, you know, so I'd stuff everything in my mouth, wash it down with a glass of milk, and then I can go for the freaking second pork chop.
Yeah.
And it used to be a normal way that you were satisfied when you were stuffed. Which is a horrible feeling. I don't do it anymore.
Yeah.
It's a terrible feeling to feel stuffed, like Thanksgiving, you know, and people do that every single day.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's like, I think you hit the nail on the head with satisfied, right? What makes you feel satisfied and full? And so that is something where there can be a bit of a recalibration, but I do think it's really important to make sure that you are getting enough food. Like, you shouldn't be afraid to eat food. You want to eat more of the good stuff, but I think that it's not something where you want to feel like, oh God, I can't have any more, you know. But in terms of like, it does take a good 20 minutes for your body to really, for all those processes to happen. So you actually, like, your mind knows that your body's full, right? And that's just because it takes a little while to break down some of that food. So one of the most important things you can do is just try to eat a little slower, right? And this comes back to like ideas around mindful eating, if you've heard that term, which is just like enjoying it a little more, trying to chew a little slower, which is better for your digestion anyway. And then notice kind of the flavors more, notice how it is. And, you know, maybe if you're really wanting to be focused on that portion control size, you know, maybe enjoy a glass of water or something just kind of after you've had that first portion. And it doesn't have to be a thing where you say, this is all I get. You know, you can kind of let yourself see how you feel. Like, you can eat that food, maybe have some water, and then give yourself a little bit of time. And if you're still hungry, go get some more food. You know, like, that's the other part, is that, again, I think part of this is it has to be sustainable and it has to be enjoyable. And so you have to feel happy with what you're eating, you know?
So one of my last points I want to ask you about is water. Boy, if some people could get off soda and just get on water, what a shift that would make. So my questions are this: how much should we drink? When should we drink it? Is it okay to have it carbonated? And can people put, flavorful stuff in it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on about how important water is, right? Like literally, if you think about every cell in your body, what's kind of the main part of every single cell in your body? It's water, right? It's so incredibly important to your overall health. And from a vanity point of view, it's actually extra important, right? Like if you want to have really nice skin or hair or anything like that, you got to hydrate. So both from a health and even again from that other side. So in terms of how much, it depends on how big you are, right? Like your size, like one person, if you're about 4 foot, you're going to need a little less than the person that's 6'5". But in general, you're going to want to be drinking anywhere from like 8 to 10 glasses a day. I actually find that that's really individual. I find that I tend to, because I like to move, I also need a lot of water, right, to replenish. So I probably drink, several quarts a day. So that's a little bit individual.
That's more than
but if you're
10 glasses a day is several quarts. You're drinking more than 8 to 10 glasses a day.
I am, yeah. And so if you're struggling to remember to drink water, there's a lot of different things you can do there. There's some apps that you can try. You can set an alarm on your phone. Some people like to have one big container for the amount of water they need to drink for the entire day, and they like have it in their bottle, their water bottle or whatever it is, and they just drink add it throughout the day, right? So there's a lot of different ways you can do that. Carbonated water is great, definitely fine. And if you're someone that's used to drinking soda, then carbonated water is an amazing choice because it's going to give you some of that satisfaction of that carbonation without all of that sugar. And two, like flavor enhancers are wonderful. And so I'd say the best flavor enhancers are going to be things like you can do, of course, there's lemon and lime, but even like a little bit of frozen fruit in there sometimes can really add a lot. Or things like, squeezing some orange in or some mint, whatever you like, whatever flavors sound nice to you, or herbal iced tea if you don't add sugar to it is also a really great thing. So it doesn't have to be, if you just cannot get yourself to drink regular water, then again, it's not about fighting yourself and trying to make yourself do something you hate. It's about finding things that you do enjoy and ways that you can enjoy it. So add whatever you want. Try to avoid things that are going to be high in processed sugars, and try to avoid a lot of, strange flavor enhancers, I guess is what I would say. If you can go more natural, that's probably better if you're drinking it all day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, it's one of the best things that I do for myself is like I play a lot of golf. And I walk when I play, I don't ride.
Mm-hmm.
And is that I prepare myself, and this is really what I need to do with the rest of my life. I prepare myself with my large container of ice water and then 4 bottles of water. And I put a little orange stuff in there. It doesn't have any calories or anything like that. And it's like the best thing I do for myself. I drink more water than anybody does on the course, and I never get worn out there. And I'm walking and they're driving.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's hot, really sweating and everything like that. Not that this has any importance to anything, but it's just one of my own little personal victories is that I do drink enough water when I play. Okay.
Well,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, as you pointed out, like it has a huge impact on your energy level. And also, even if you are looking at trying to eat a little bit less, having more water really does, like being fully hydrated lets you know that if you're hungry, you're really hungry. Because sometimes your food, your hydration and your hunger signals can get a little bit confused. And that doesn't mean to ignore it if you're feeling hungry, but if you want to make sure you're hydrated to kind of even be able to tell if it really is hunger.
Is it okay to drink water before a meal?
Yeah. It's actually can be helpful because again, it can be kind of hydrating yourself ahead of time and like it's a little more filling. Not like you need to be drinking water instead of food, but it can be a helpful thing.
So when we go through, if we sleep for 7 or 8 hours, which is a whole nother subject, but we know about how important sleep is. Should we drink a glass of water before we go to bed because we're going to be without water for 6 or 7 hours?
You can. That's a great thing. It depends on the person though, because your sleep is also really important. If you're someone that drinking a glass of water means you're going to have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and it wakes you up every night, and if you, for instance, have trouble getting back to sleep, then, get that glass of water before bed, drink a whole bunch of water when you wake up instead. So it really depends. I think that's a good, healthy habit. But if as a person you're finding it's really disrupting your sleep schedule, then don't do it.
I'm one of those people that if I wake up at 4 a.m. to have a glass of water, I'm really excited because I still have a couple more hours to sleep. You know what I mean?
Yeah, then that's perfect. Yes. Yeah.
But I'm a nutcase. So, okay. So here's what I want to do. And this is what I want to leave people with. We got Joe from Ohio, and everybody's related to Joe from Ohio. We all eat a little bit like Joe from Ohio. We all understand Joe from Ohio's problems. So Joe wakes up at 7 o'clock in the morning and he goes to bed at, let's say, 11 o'clock at night. Give us an overview of, one, what kind of meal should Joe have for breakfast? What kind of meal should he have for lunch? You don't have to get really crazy specific, but an idea. And same for dinner. And then should he snack in between?
Yeah. So, it's tricky because I don't really think diet's a one size fits all. So I can throw out some ideas of some healthy foods. And so, for instance, like a healthy breakfast, again, you just want to think about what are the foods we're trying to eat more of and what are the foods we're trying to eat a little less of, right? So for breakfast, maybe a lot of people find a really easy, healthy meal is going to be oatmeal, some fresh berries in there, maybe a little peanut butter. And that, for a lot of people, is going to be something that makes them feel full and satisfied for hours throughout that day. For lunch, you might want a nice sandwich on maybe some whole grain bread. I would probably put like a bunch of veggies on there. You could even do something you could do like a tempeh bacon. I don't know if you've ever had that. They're actually really yummy. That's going to be a little higher in salt, but pretty great. And if you're looking for like a bacon type substitute, it can be a nice one, right? So I think that's the other part of this is you can do some plant-based meats if you want, right? Like you can play around with that. If you're transitioning and you're trying to move towards it, if you want to try a tofurkey slice, go for it. That's still health-wise going to be a much better thing. So if we're talking about Joe from Ohio, I'd probably tell him to make like a nice sandwich that feels familiar, that doesn't feel too different.
But with some vegetables, some lettuce, tomato, maybe avocado,
yeah,
whole wheat bread, and maybe mustard.
absolutely.
And that's pretty balanced kind of lunch.
Yeah, and then maybe some fruit with it. So maybe an orange or an apple or whatever you have, right? Something else to kind of round it out and make it feel a little more full. And then for dinner, again, it's just going to depend on what you like. There's a whole world out there, but you could do a whole wheat pasta with some bunch of veggies, maybe you roast some veggies. And then, maybe you have in the afternoon as a snack, maybe you have something with some hummus and some veggies with that, or maybe you have some fruit. So there's a lot of different options there, I'd say. I definitely think that it again comes back to experimenting. It can be if there are familiar things you like, maybe just try the slightly healthier version of that, right? Or if you are at the point where you're like, I'm real tired of all this stuff, like play around a little. There's a lot of great resources out there. Even if you just Google plant-based resources, there's so many great healthy ones that you can start to experiment and play and try new flavors.
One real quick thing here. You talk about metabolism and how that works with our own systems.
Yeah, well, so your metabolism is it's going to vary. And a lot of your metabolism, some of it's genetic, some of it's things like how much muscle mass you have. That's going to impact it significantly as well. And so some people are going to naturally just get hungrier. And, some people are going to be those people that like sort of almost naturally fast and they just don't want to eat except 1 or 2 meals a day. And then some people are going to want much more frequent. So I tend to personally find that I do better when I have more frequent meals. And so that's not true of everyone. And there's a lot of great research for intermittent fasting. If that's something that you do well with, that's great. For me personally, I find that I tend to need some healthy snacks throughout the day, or I start to get really hungry often. So your metabolism in general, again, is going to be varied, but your diet, a healthy diet can kind of match that, right? So whether that's eating a little more often or eating slightly bigger portions, depending on where your metabolism is, you can really have a very similar healthy diet with whatever metabolism you have.
Claire, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your time and how much I appreciate your expertise. And I know that anybody that will sit and watch this will just get a whole bunch of information that will help them to make better decisions for themselves, to help them, take care of themselves better, to eat better, and to start to feel different and feel healthy. And man, your information was absolutely incredible. So I can't say enough about how much I appreciate you taking the time to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really, again, it's a real passion of mine to have the opportunity to talk to people about nutrition, and just, again, how much, I hope people walk away feeling that really empowered, that like you have so much control over your health and over your diet, and you can have it all. You can be really healthy and have nutritious food, and also food that you love that feels really good, right? That you just enjoy eating. So I hope people feel encouraged by that.
Thank you. And we'll talk to you again. And I look forward to working with you on your whole, from garden to table to you. Love that.
Love it.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Take care.
you.
Have a great day. We'll talk to you soon.
Too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.